Operations are like cicadas, like we kind of fall asleep and then all of a sudden we wake up, not 17 years, but we wake up and like, oh my goodness, what has happened? I just left for a minute, and then like, okay, we got to reel this in. And then again, it's not about stopping and slowing down. It's figuring out how to create sort of a control mechanism that it is equal to the variety of the speed and all those things.
If you're ready to unlock momentum, you're in the right place. I'm Aaron Kopel, the Momentum Locksmith, and this is where CIOs come to grow. Welcome back, everyone, to Unlocking Momentum. I'm so excited to have John Willis with us today. Super interesting guy that I've gotten to know a little bit. And so very excited for our show today, for him to share some insights and some good stories, I think, as well. So with that, John, tell us about you. How'd you get to where you are now?
Yeah, it's funny. I've had a long career, 5 decades, basically 5 decades of spanning technology transformations. Probably within the last 10 years, I've been a little more reflective of what I've been doing. If people are familiar with DevOps, right? Like I'm the O in the DevOps, right? I've always been operations and I just love large scale, particularly regulated businesses. Been almost my whole life. I mean, I've done startups, but usually it's startups that sell software to large scale regulated. So that's been my whole career. And I was, as being sort of a little reflective over the last 10 years about like what did I really do? And I think I do, and I think what operations people do, infrastructure and operations, including risk, we protect the brand. So, that sounds lofty, but like the sort of the other side is trying to move commerce, trying to make money and do all this stuff. In fact, what we need to do is create sort of controls that balance that, not stop them, not slow them down, but balance that. But our goal is to literally, I don't think there's anything more important than protecting your brand. I mean, people talk about like, let's make money, let's revenue, but like at the end of the day, all that stems from like protection of the brand. So that's been most of my career. I started out as a mainframe developer. I did the first wave of distributed systems. I helped bring Linux into large regulated banks. Expert systems, of course, cloud. And then I'm considered one of the founders of the DevOps movement and DevSecOps. And now I've been for the last 4 or 5 years working with large scale regulated businesses to help them figure out how to protect the brand for AI strategies.
Yeah. That's, of course, a hot topic right now. So that's
sure, absolutely, yeah.
But that we've gotten quite a bit into, and it's interesting because I will, as we talk here, I'm sure we'll find some commonalities here. But that's a big part of it is people looking at that from a technology perspective, almost purely, and of course, need to think bigger, like you said, about protecting the brand, about leadership, alignment, and all the things that come with it to make that successful. The technology part at the end of it is important too, but it's all the other stuff around it that makes it all work.
We will talk more about that, but we've had this discussion, and it was a good discussion when we first sort of met. The idea is it isn't just the technology, and it's not just the technology stupid, but sometimes people just can't get that out of their way. Right?
Yeah.
So
that's right. Well, I know, John, you've been around for a while. You've written some books and things, so a lot of leading up to now, and really staying on the forefront of new technologies, which is great. And so, with that in mind, as you think about your past self, if you could give yourself a piece of advice to that, younger kid just, setting off on his career, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, no, I think back to the things that are like DevOps was a moment, getting involved in DevOps and all that. It sort of opened up a lot to see the world differently because the world had changed in my world, right? And I think one of the things that came out of that is this idea of understanding what failure really means. And so one of the things I appreciate being in DevOps, not only just sort of helped me write a book, I made a little money off the book, but is that I think what I would tell myself that I didn't really fully understand until I was involved in the DevOps movement, which is failure is learning, right? And learning is a feedback loop. And I would tell myself, hey, that stuff you learned in science classes, that scientific method stuff, pay attention to that because you may use it for the rest of your life. And, hypothesis and just the idea that, I always tell people, young people, like, if they finally cure cancer, it'll be millions, maybe billions of failures to get there, right? So the idea that failure isn't like a bad thing. Yeah. I mean, it can be consequences, but in general, understand that you embrace failure as a learning.
Yeah, that's a great one. I wish I had that piece of advice when I was younger.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah,
I
yeah.
spent so much time trying not to fail and trying to avoid it and hide from it and that kind of stuff.
Or worried about it, or, I mean, a lot of what the DevOps movement, and what we learned a lot from, like, Toyota Production Systems and some of the stuff that came out of Japan, is that the way they embraced failure in that culture was learning.
Mhm.
So there's great stories about where, sort of an American culture, sort of, I don't say everything changed with DevOps, but pre-DevOps, pre-Agile, was if you made a mistake, like on a manufacturing line, like use the wrong paint mixture or something like that in creating cars, right? Like, that was trouble. You got yelled at. You might have got fired. You might have get put on notice. In Toyota, there's a great story of a gentleman who was there in the 60s, and he'd written a couple of books about him, where he tells his first story at Toyota. He actually mixed the paint wrong, and they came to him and they said, "Thank you." Like, whoa, I thought I was going to get fired, right? And he was like, no, now we know that we should probably have better procedures for earlier, so yeah, no, I think being able to understand that there should be a world where, blamelessness on failure creates failure for learning, which learning needs feedback. So yeah.
And I think that's your point. It's really maybe the people around you and how they respond to that failure as well. If they're going to chastise you and beat you down for it, then you're not likely to bring it up and look at it that way. But if they look at it as a learning opportunity and say, thank you for finding that problem that we need to fix our process or have better instructions or whatever, then you're going to take that in a very different way, the opportunity to learn from that failure.
That's right. And the dangers behind that are, like, been well documented by some of the safety critical people, where it is like a nurse knows that if he or she's going to get fired, they're probably going to hide the results, right? It becomes sort of a negative, because things are not being exposed because people are concerned about those things. So, like, there's such an opportunity to just destroy that blameful environment, or not seeing failure as, like, again, saying thank you to that gentleman who mixed the wrong paint, right?
Yeah.
Or
That's a great example and good advice for the younger self. So yeah, to share that with my kids as well. Try to do more of that. So, all right. Well, moving into the next part of our show here, we got the name of the show, Unlocking Momentum, and so we would like to talk about examples of where we really had a breakthrough moment where we're maybe stuck or stagnant, or the business was struggling or something like that, and we're able to break through that and build momentum and get things going again, maybe through some new thinking or new approaches. And so I know you've got a lot of experiences in different ways with that, but kind of curious, as you've thought about that, what's the good example you'd like to bring up and share with our audience?
yeah, like I said earlier, I consider myself the O in DevOps, but my whole career is about operations infrastructure, which is about, like, I get sort of excited about the technology, but then my sort of default thinking pattern is, okay, wait a minute, how is this going to affect an organization from a risk perspective? And again, the brand, I think, is the most important. So one of the things I've always said over the years is operations are like cicadas. Like, we kind of fall asleep, and then all of a sudden we wake up, not 17 years, but we wake up and, like, oh my goodness, what has happened? I just left for a minute, and then, like, okay, we got to reel this in. And then again, it's not about stopping and slowing down. It's figuring out how to create sort of a control mechanism that it is equal to the variety of the speed and all those things. And, I mentioned earlier that, like, my sort of why I love my DevOps, and, consider one of the founders of it, is, but that was my big aha moment, because that was the one where, like, I'd done, like, distributed computing. I'd done sort of some other sort of transformations where, like, I felt the cicada thing, but I learned that the genie was out of the bottle, right? That was where I really understood this idea of sort of a control plane that has to move as fast as the system you're trying to control. And it's actually called Ashby's Law, is the sort of official name, is like, and it's, just to be a little technical, it's variety absorbs variety, right? And that means that you have to balance. And that was a real big aha. It was a big aha in that like, I really did fall asleep at the wheel. I wasn't seeing what was going on in software delivery. I was stuck in a world where we were just hyper focused on operations. So I learned that things were like happening at a speed and mostly with younger, small companies, but I knew that was coming to the big companies. And then I realized that like there was a new way to think about this is that you couldn't stop this. It was the first time where like I think a lot of us thought that we're doing large scale infrastructure is you're not going to be able to stop this. This permeates back into cloud. It then becomes part of AI. It isn't that you like me. There are things you have to stop with AI, but in general, you're going to have a much smoother ride if you can literally figure out like a control plane that absorbs. This idea of attributes law, I think, is becoming really important again when it comes to AI.
A lot of those things have added up over the last few decades where I think the companies that are having more early success with AI in terms of actually getting, value and revenue and a positive ROI out of it are the ones that really have picked up on those things over the last few decades of DevOps and Agile and a lot of the concepts there that really enable them and set them up for success. So kind of curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like there's always been this, I mean, names are interesting, right? Like, I mean, we call things names so they have this double-edged sword, right? We call it a cloud. And then everybody kind of, oh, what is that? And it sort of opens the door to be able to understand there's a new way of thinking, right? And then over some period of time, like, why is we still using that name, right? Well, it worked. Does it work now? But then like we over rotate then on the name. And in fact, the early days of cloud, it had gotten to the point where there would be people I admire would spend hours arguing about this is not a cloud because it doesn't have these four things. I'm like, the cloud is a metaphor. And the point I'm getting to is there's been this DevOps is dead mantra for forever. And it's a dangerous mantra because, again, it's just a name, right? It is a name that worked really well to get people to think differently, including myself. I mean, if you think about what DevOps produced over the last decade or 15 years, you don't have Uber, you don't have Airbnb. I mean, like the technology and the commerce that has happened because of, and again, it's a combination of things like cloud and all that. But the point is that DevOps was the right way to do things. And so when people say DevOps is dead or, I think the question is like, so producing software in a sort of mitigated risk environment with security that is efficient, that doesn't create negative ROI for humans, like that's dead. Again, I think the answer is that, these things, whether you want to call it DevOps, if you want to rename it, give me a better name, first off, and I'm going to be hard pressed to say there's a better name because it is just a name and everybody understands what it is. But at the end of the day, the true principles, I think most people thought DevOps was, oh, I get it now. It's delivering software through your continuous integration, continuous delivery thing. That's part of it. It's telemetry and observability that's part of it. But like there's a whole aspect of a systems thinking view of that is the whole system. And when you try to say that's not needed with AI, I've had a lot of AI experts are like, John, you might want to think about your career. DevOps is going to be dead. I'm like, yeah, okay. Like good hygiene for delivering services to customer is not going to be dead.
I think that's what I see a lot out there is some of those things that, like I said, have been around for a couple decades, DevOps, cloud, Agile, that kind of stuff. People are saying it's dead. And I think part of that is because they're feeling like the push to have people do the initial adoption is dead because it's just the way everyone knows that you should be working. And so it's one of those things we just don't need to talk about anymore because everyone knows that that's the thing to do. That's where I see a lot of people saying things are dead, like Agile and DevOps.
Right. But the question then is, that goes back to the name thing. Have we truly embraced the blessing and curse of a name, a metaphoric name, right? It galvanizes everybody to think the same because now we can at least agree on maybe these are the things we're actually talking about, right? But the negative is that they become calcified in your view of what they are. And so at that point, then you could have this idea where people are like, why do I need DevOps when I have AI? Well, the real question is, do I actually need to hire experts who do configuration management or infrastructure as code? The answer is probably not. So that's a good example of what you were just talking about, which is that I probably don't need to hire two. And if I'm a really large company, I don't need a team of 5 that are doing, say like HashiCorp or IBM HashiCorp Terraform stuff, right? But does that mean I'm not doing infrastructure as code anymore? And do I not have to adhere to the principles of the risk, the ROI, all those things? So, yeah, you have to. Those things still exist. And the problem is when we take for granted, to your point, if we think, okay, aren't we already doing that? I don't know. Because if you look at the umbrella view of DevOps, it's about having a term that's been coined since 1950, social technical systems, where the technology and the humans are interacting. So if that's your perception and you believe you grounded your organization, you're saying we already do DevOps, and that assumes that you are actually understanding how humans and technology work together in an efficient system, then yeah, you're right. You don't have to move on. But in my experience, that's
Right there.
That's right.
That's for sure. Yeah, that's for sure. That's I think a lot of hopes and wishes that they're there, but it's usually not actually true, right? So yeah, interesting. Well, as we think about the future then, and what we taking some of these concepts and going into the future, what are you seeing with AI that might concern you? Sort of that hot take on it. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, there's a couple of things, right? I talked about one is sort of the metrics, but I think the thing I'm finding most, which is as I work with CIOs, or normally I get brought into an organization through sort of a chief of staff of the CIO, right? And it's usually the chief of staff's like, you really need to talk to this guy. And so I, like they've sort of greased the skids, if you will. For me, I'm not an MBA guy, right? So like if I was to directly talk to CIO, they'd be, get out of my office, right? But usually there's a highly trusted person involved who's like, Joe, you really should talk to him. They tell you what he's did. I've been following him, or I know him. And then we have a conversation where the expectation is I'm not Ernst & Young or Accenture or whatever. And then I don't have to fake how I talk and all that stuff. But so the thing I'm seeing the most right now, and I'm getting traction with, is this idea that leaders have always created innovation strategies. And there's nothing wrong with that. Oh, there's a couple of things, but having an innovation strategy in by itself is not a bad thing. But not understanding your talent strategy is where the thing breaks, right? And I think the problem that we have is leaders will go ahead and either from top down, because horizontal or competitive, or Wall Street will sort of say, we have to have an AI strategy, and then maybe bring in an advisor that tells them they can AI strategy. And so they lay out what we're going to do 60, 90, 80 day, not 90, 180 day, right? Plans, right? And the thing is, they don't really understand their talent, or they make the assumption that their talent, I've seen this where like CIOs tell me like, John, I don't think my organization is capable of doing AI. I'm like, what do you know? And so my proposal is, let's find out what your talent is. And I don't mean talent in like good enough. I mean the social technical structure of your talent. Like there are people in your organization, this I find all the time, who really are apathetic. They don't want to use AI. They don't believe AI should be used, right? And they're critical pieces to the today company XYZ. Then you have the people who literally believe in AI, but they're not getting clear direction, right? And so they're the ones that like, I want to follow, particularly as you get into a highly regulated business like banking. Okay, I don't have clear, and I know I can get fired for that, right? And then you have the people who I call the do now, ask forgiveness later people, who are just the sort of people who get things done. And more often than not, they are the heroes, and they do great things. And like, over the years, there's been great stories of people that I know who have like changed, like Target or changed, a large corporation because they were told they couldn't use these things, and they did it anyway. And then when they did it, they were like, "Oh my goodness, thank you." But unfortunately, a reasonable percentage of the time, that's where all rogue behavior and risk gets accumulated, right? So the question then is, you can have a strategy all day long, but if it's top down or it's horizontally driven, you need to understand from the bottom up. And this is my day job these days, is spending time with the people who have fingers on the keyboard, who basically find out what they think, what they know, what they want, because they're, again, I'm like, bringing in outside organization is a great thing in a lot of scenarios. The one place it's not is when they come in and they start from a top down and start saying what the strategy should look like. Because the wealth of your knowledge in an organization is in the people with the fingers on the keyboard. Right. And so, like, at the very least, find out what they're capable, find out what they're thinking, find out where the pockets of knowledge are, and they will tell you where the opportunities are. And you'll know this is probably never going to work. Why are we not doing this yesterday? So again, I think that it is that, I used the talent strategy, and a friend of mine corrected me the other day, is like, people perceive that as, are you good enough? And I'm like, yeah, that's not what I mean. I mean a talent system, a systems approach. And if the innovation strategy is not matching what your organizational behavior and organizational dynamics, like, it's just not going to work. It will not work. And it's not just AI. This is, 5 decades I've seen this problem of, somebody, the old sort of, the like, we make a joke of it, but like the CIO or even the CEO sees a poster in the airport and comes back and puts the posters all over the walls and says, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good luck.
It used to be the airline magazines, which I don't think they have the seat anymore. Right?
Yeah, no, that's terrible. Yeah. So but yeah, and even like the commercials on TV, right? Like, I'm always amazed over the years. When I started in this industry, you'd never see a technology commercial. Between fifth inning of a ball game, and then when we got into cloud, we started seeing more in Apple, of course, right? But now I'm seeing sometimes like, oh my God, that's a commercial about vector data. I mean, I don't think I've actually seen that, but like, it's that we're getting so entwined with the technology now that it's not uncommon to see very.
I believe people are getting more adept with it and able to use it more. And
yeah.
So it's interesting, like you said, the talent side of it, and the people that are there with fingers on the keyboard understand more about where the current problems are. And like, that's maybe the balancing act is, a lot of times the strategy is not cohesive from the top, so it gets confusing for those folks. But at the other way around, if they do have a strategy but don't understand where the current issues are that might handicap us from going where we want to go, there's got to be some kind of balance between the two, right?
No, it definitely got to be balanced, right? And then that's why I'm saying, like, there's nothing wrong with an innovation strategy, right? Again, I make the assumption that people who go to work every day in an organization, leaders, people with the keyboard, project managers, they're all there to do a good job, right? Like, most people say, you can't change people. Those people are horrible. No, they wake up in the morning, like, like, some may be more enthused than others, but in the end, the default assumption should be people come to work to do a good job.
Yeah, so probably more percentage that wake up and say, today I'm going to do the worst job.
And usually they get ferreted out pretty easy, right? But, I think the thing that, what I find, which is really interesting, is, so there's nothing wrong with an innovation strategy. And what I want to say is, most leaders are there for the right reason. Not all, but like, a lot of leaders, even the whole idea of like codifying this idea as innovation versus talent strategy was a CIO from a healthcare system who like explained it to me. I'm like, I've been kind of saying that, but that's a much better way to say it. So the leaders know what they're doing, and they understand the level of what innovation strategy should be at a level that the people with the fingers in the keyboard don't. But the people in the fingers in the keyboard are the ones who can sort of dissect, like, that will never work. And here's the thing. When I do these, I call qualitative analysis, where I go in and I interview hundreds of people. Sometimes my biggest one was like 400 or 500 people from a digital group of a $10 trillion asset holding company. And one of the things interesting, you start going through a qualitative process, you earn the trust, you start learning so much about an organization. And you have to have a good horizontal base to be able to, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is, because that's part of earning trust. But the thing that inevitably happens always near the end of the engagement, you get this sort of fear from everybody. There's this hope. Like, in fact, what's kind of funny is it starts off like they don't want to talk to me because I'm the Bob, right? And then you earn their trust, and then they don't shut up, right? And then near the end, they get this fear like, we did all this stuff. Is this going to be another one where, we tell you all this stuff and nothing happens? So I always tell the CIO at the end, I'm like, you know what? If you plan on throwing my report in the trash bag, doesn't matter. You're going to pay me either way. And this is what I tell on the beginning. I'm like, I'm going to tell you things that other companies probably won't tell you because I'm not going to be here after a month or two. But you're going to pay me anyway. And then at the end, I say, and I tell them they're going to get mad at me. And they do get mad at me. And then I say, here's the thing. Like, whether you want to throw this report in the trash can or not, the one thing I beg you to do for your organization is implement a couple of things that are in this report. Because they will never trust you, and they don't trust you. They're tired of you bringing in people like me to help them. Because they're like, again, I get that hope out of them. They're like, man, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. And then I tell them, I said, well, your CIO hired me. They hired me over somebody else. So they're a risk taker. And then I don't and more often than not, they do implement a lot of the things, right? Because they're good things. And it's not like I'm a genius. They're the things you should do. But at the end of the day, I beg you, you will destroy the trust in your organization. Because this time they actually fell for it, So, so I think that's the things I think a lot about is sort of, and then, I think we're going to talk a little more about vanity metrics, but certainly that's a whole second thing. So I think is driving me crazy.
That kind of plays right into trust as well, right? So, and I think you're right. When you go in and do that kind of assessment, really, people open up about here's the issues I see, here's my perspective, those kind of things. It's one thing to not take any action on it. I think the thing I've seen that's even maybe worse from a trust perspective is they get the report and they don't even share what was found. It's just sort of like, hey, I dumped it all here for you, and then it just kind of dissipated and nothing happened. Like, it wasn't even like we consciously made a decision not to do it. It's just like it disappeared.
Yeah, it's
just, again, that trust just goes way down. Like, why should I participate?
I finally opened up. I have people, one of my favorite ones was some woman who did payroll it was like a 40,000 person company, and she owned payroll. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about change control. And every time somebody it was a group of a lot of app owners, right? So one of it was payroll. And the whole sort of first part of the day, she's like, you guys got to stop telling them, we're going to get trouble. We're going to you got to, and she'd lecture every one of them like, John, I like you, but man, you all got to stop telling them these stories. So finally a question came up about change control. And if they didn't meet the sort of the Wednesday change control meeting, and somehow it translated into me asking a question like, what happens for you if there's a payroll change and payroll's coming on Friday and you miss the change control window? She goes, oh, I put it in production. Yeah, my job. And now she's telling me the glory truth that she will literally bypass a regulated business's process, which actually probably could have been a firing offense. And she told me the truth that she, and that's like, okay, I'm doing a good job, And I cover that, I anonymize, I do a lot of work, because that's what qualitative analysis is. It allows me to roll things up into sort of a structure that I can tell you the point, but I can bury the who did it, what.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Then, yeah, it's safer for really both sides of that equation.
That's right, exactly.
Well, hitting on trust, going back to the comment you made just a few minutes ago, the vanity metrics side of it, kind of curious for your take on that, if you've seen that take shape here with AI.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny how we repeat the same mistakes over and over. I mean, I don't know, it's like 10 or 15 years ago, or let's say 20 years ago, again, like as you get older and all the math of like how long things were like get worse and worse. But there was a time where like, oh, computers and servers, and we got a lot of developers. And what we started measuring is the lines of code, KLOCs, right? And like that became the thing. And then somewhere like some Tuesday in like 1998 or whatever, they realized that's a terrible metric. Because one, it tells us nothing about value, but two, people are gaming it because you tell me what you want me to measure, and I'll sort of give you like that. And so we figured all that out. Well, what's been happening over the last 2 years? We started out with CIOs and CEOs bragging about adoption rates. Oh, we went from 35% AI adoption to 40% last year, or we ran 3 pilots last year. We've already run 20 this year. And then like, okay, like, and they think they're evolving. The conversation is, well, is that helpful? Well, John, it is helpful because we've increased pull requests in our Git libraries. Get them like, okay, is that helpful? You start doing like a 5Y, right? Is that helpful? And like when you sort of drill down to all these sort of metrics, the last question is, how do you calibrate or create any form of metric around value? Because nothing you told me, I mean, like, I don't care that you went from 10% to 40% AI adoption. What I care is how much of that adoption increase turned into measurable value. And I'm not saying value has never been an easy metric for as long as I've been doing this. But we aren't even trying to ask that question. We're literally throwing out pull requests and adoption rates and pilots and all these things. And, and I think, it amazes me that, and even my friends who are experts, and I apologize to them if they're listening to this podcast, but, there's a user experience, DX stuff. They've been doing great stuff. There's some companies and, they've really pulled developer experience into a nice qualitative approach to understand metrics. What are they doing with AI? So they've literally taken DevOps and they've put qualitative metrics that make sense, that at least point to value. They've gone all the way back in 20 years in time now because they are literally adding new metrics in the DX space that are basically the equivalent of what I call lines of code or KLOCs. Mm-hmm. All right, so this is the part that, and we're seeing the blast radius of this through all these sort of token economic problems. Because even Amazon just recently, they had a token leaderboard. This is another thing. So like, okay, so are we evolving that we went from pull requests to pilot counts to now how many tokens are our employees using? Yeah. Oh, Joe and Sue are at the top of the token leaderboard. Again, where's the value? And what we're seeing then, I mean, we've seen already Uber ran out of their 2026 token budget in the beginning of April. Yeah. Amazon literally got rid of their token dashboard because they realized it was creating a negative effect. People were gaming the system for token usage. And, and then there's this story that came out last week. Is, I'm hearing a rumor who it might be. I'll probably hold off here now until I get confirmation. But it's somebody almost everybody uses, and so apparently some bill came in for $500 million from Claude Code, who was an Anthropic. Mm. So that's all over the news, right? Like one sort of bill, I guess. I don't know if it was all the employees or one employee or whatever, right? Like. We're not looking at value. We're not looking at hybrid solutions. Not everything has to be in a frontier model, but like you can't even make those decisions until you can calibrate value.
Yeah. Yeah, it is crazy. I mean, the token maxing thing as well.
Yeah, token maxing, that's a new word. That wasn't on my bingo card 2 months ago.
Yeah, that's a new one, but it's super interesting. And the explanation I've heard to try to give it some validity is, well, we're encouraging people to experiment and learn. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get that. But like, to your point, the leaderboard then turns that metric into something that people just want to game because they're getting rewarded for it, either just pride of ownership kind of thing, or financially maybe even. that they're if it's half leaderboard, they're getting a bonus or whatever. And that's
Yeah, no,
crazy. Like basically they're learning, but are they learning the right things? Are they trying valid experiments with a hypothesis and a feedback loop, or
well,
are they just,
well,
throwing garbage at the wall?
I'm working with a really large client right now, and one of the things I do love about the quality of analysis is like I don't broadcast to my customers, but like I wind up learning more than they learn from me, and that's why I love going into these organizations. And so one of the ones companies I'm working with right now, a well-known brand, is yeah, I talk about the J curve and the J. People talk about the failures of AI. I'm like, no, we're in the failures are the J curve, the bottom of the J curve. We're in that. So people think about innovation in an S curve, right? It's sort of squirrely linear, but not really linear, right? But it really is innovation or technology transformations follow more often a J curve where you start out with enthusiasm, you fall into this sort of trough, if you will, and then at some point, hopefully, you start accelerating into the right side of the J, right? So the thing I was missing is you have to be able to create what this person pointed out to me is the slingshot for the bottom of the J curve. And that is learning, right? And value. And so like if you go into we can fail, we should fail, we will fail. So this like token maxing and all that stuff is fine if you got a plan. Because if you're just treading water on token maxing and there's no sort of value escape velocity or or sort of learning to fail, because like okay, well we tried this 3 times, this is not working. Maybe we would do another pilot. Mm-hmm. But it all starts with being able to calibrate value.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Like that value equation, to your point, it's, at times goes out of style. So we figure all these things out, like lock in value, understand good metrics and that kind of stuff. And then the next big thing that comes along, we kind of forget about those things for a while. And partly, trying to figure out what could value look like here, but a lot of it's the same stuff. We just got to think about it from a different angle.
Got to be the same stuff. And then, the other thing I talk a lot about is, so this idea of there's always been this idea of like technology, winters and springs. And I like a friend of mine came and told me like this idea of like, it's more like a fluorescence. It's energy that sort of like becomes sort of bright or fluorescent but the energy's still there. And there's like the next fluorescence is really, it isn't like a winter where everything died and we start over. Like that's rolling over, but it is the fluorescence that sort of gets in our way. In other words, we start like, why? How do really smart people who run trillions of dollars worth of commerce make the K-lock mistake? It's the fluorescence. Oh, AI, it's this is different this time, John. Trust me. Like yes, some of it is different. The thing I like to point out, especially when I do the risk stuff, I do risk workshops, AI, agentic risk workshops, is the thing I want to point out is this is the first time we've had infinite knowledge at machine speed with delegated authority. That's a different blast radius than we've ever seen in any other technology transformation we've seen. That is different. It creates new variables on all levels. What isn't different is the social technical aspects of the technology. And we just need to be able to sort of see. And again, I love the fluorescence, and it's probably a terrible metaphor because I don't know, everybody gets it. But the things that escape it on the positive side, let's keep rolling with that. Let's not just throw it away. But the things that escape it as sort of the waste or the sort of, the like to go crazy, the entropy or whatever, like those are the things we need to sort of be ready for our slingshot in the J curve to make sure that those things are not getting the emphasis or,
Yep. It's a really good point. One last big question. We may be reiterating some stuff we talked about because we covered a lot of ground, but what do you say is the one big thing CIOs should really be paying attention to here in the near future to make sure that they're on a good path and paying attention to the right things?
I think still a lot of CIOs or organizations, and particularly a risk, right? Like I've always been interested. We've wrote a book about some papers and a book of a bunch of us who were in highly regulated industries that created what we loosely call DevOps automated governance, but we really tried to focus on the banking risks. And so the thing that I think is what people are organizations are having a hard time, and in internal auditors and the risk teams, is that in order to use this new technology, this idea of infinite knowledge with machine speed and delegated authority, the problem with that is it's an inferential engine. An inferential engine is going to be probabilistic. And so there will be wrong answers. There will be wrong tasks. And what you cannot, when somebody says to me, John, like in this organization, that can never, ever, ever, ever happen. I'm like, then you can never, ever, ever, ever use generative AI for that. And that's the reality check that people are going to have to come to the conclusion that you have to not think deterministically that it is yes or no, or yes, and it can never do this. It's yes, and what is the agreed upon risk profile that we're going to accept? What's the cost of that risk? And how are we auditing our diligence to contain that risk? And I think once the auditors figure out all this stuff, they're going to require audit trails that sort of it's like using determinism to control non-determinism, right? And they're going to demand that you have an audit trail. Like the thing, I can't wait for the day when an internal, the IIA or an internal auditor tells me that they basically asked, explain to me the sort of lineage of this answer. So, so some type of inference that gave an answer that is under regulatory control. Explain to me how you got this answer. And then the question is going to be, where did you get the data from? Were you sure the data was the right data? What was the exact data that you got? Did you use a model to sort of use it? Did you use, now I'll get very technical, embedding models? Did you use a RAG? Like, I need to know exactly what the footprint, and this is what we did in that DevOps automated governance. We turned into a short novel called Investments Unlimited, a bank that almost lost its banking license. And like, these are things that have to become tamper evident evidence. I just say, immutable, digitally signed immutable attestations or evidence, right? And so you're going to have to say there was a percentage of risk, like there would be a possibility of having a wrong answer, we call hallucination, or it's going to call the wrong task. And we all agreed, everybody agreed that we were willing to take that risk. And therefore, anytime I change the pipeline that delivers the service, did it meet the requirement? Let's say it was 3%, it was a 3% incorrectness, right? Or there was a 3% chance that it could be a hallucinatory action. And then there's a whole list of like building in containment and putting like guardrails on like if it's an agent that's going to do something, make sure you have kill switches. And then these are the kind of things where like I'm working with a lot of my clients is like, but people, so going back to answer your question, which I'm terrible at, it is that those are the things that CIOs have to understand in reality. It can't be just like, we can't use AI on Monday. We can't use AI on Tuesday. Wednesday, we can use AI.
The headaches that come with that kind of stuff of internal audit, be able to explain, audit trails and things like that in that kind of situation where you ask it the same question, 5 minutes apart, you're going to get a different answer. And it could be positive, like in both sides of that, but to your point, it could hallucinate, it could do other things, and trying to manage to that can be a big headache, I'm sure. So,
but there are tools like, there's sort of what they call evaluations, or sometimes called LM as a judge, or you can build a quorum of the LM judge structure, and you could build your own ground truth. So again, the point is, you can never be guaranteed that you don't get hallucination or a bad, or sort of a bad answer or a bad task. But what you can do is use state-of-the-art technology to create containment, to calibrate that that the last time you mutated or changed anything in the pipeline that created this, you met all the criteria and things like evaluation software, particularly LM as a judge. And those are the things that auditors are going to understand. And their question isn't going to, so when the question is, how did you get this answer? And it's not necessarily always going to be a bad answer. In sort of DevOps days, audits will say, give me the provenance of this change. Well, why that change? It doesn't matter. Give me the provenance of this change, right? You had to show, well, it's going to be the same thing. Like I'm going to randomly pick, you're going to have to log all the things, especially in regulated, and you're going to basically, I'm going to ask you this answer. Why that answer? Doesn't matter. Why? And then you're going to be, well, here, was it correct? No, actually, no. Well, why wasn't it correct? Well, because AI does hallucinates. Wrong answer. You know what I mean? Like, okay, like we think there's a way to create ground truth where you should at least known that had a possibility of creating that, and you have no evidence you did that, right? And that's going to basically flesh out. And then one last thing that's really important, that I just was recently on a call with a large organization, and I don't think the experts are explaining this enough. Is one of the reasons people are running out of their token budget is they realize they do have to use evaluation software. And so they calculate what their inference cost is going to be for developing code or for chatbots. And maybe they reasonably okay at that. Maybe they're off by 25%, right? But what they don't calculate is once they realize they have to use this evaluation inference or sort of judge LM as a judge or quorum. Like if you have just one, you're 2x. If you have a quorum, you could be 3-4x your cost. Yeah. And I don't know the exact with the Uber and a couple of companies that have sort of publicly announced that they've run out of budget. I suspect a lot of that is because they didn't calculate the sort of evaluation inference costs.
Yeah, that's a really good point from a cost perspective. That's a topic that's been coming up a lot as the token costs start to become real for people, and that point of like, it's not just getting the answer, it's then validating and checking and double checking.
There's a cost to that. Right? Yeah, that's an inference cost, and it's 2x just for a single evaluation. But when you start getting into agentics, single evaluation is not going to be good enough. You're going to need a quorum of judges.
Yeah, right? Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, John, this has been a great conversation. Lots of topics we covered. And as you said, starting back in the early days of DevOps, and sort of the founders of that movement, and really getting that rolling, and it's a lot of the same patterns we're seeing through cloud and agile, and now into AI. Same kind of patterns on the human side a lot of times, and it's really staying ahead of that, right? Really understanding it.
What are the new things and what are the repeatable things, and that therein lies the sort of the magic, right? So,
yeah, that's great. Good. Well, I know people are going to get a lot out of this, and I'm sure they're going to want to connect with you. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think probably it's a terrible spelling, but hopefully you'll put it on there. I created a sort of a simple site that has a pointer. It's called Botchagalupe.ai, and it points to my author portal. It points to my AI CIO newsletter. It points to my LinkedIn. LinkedIn, if you want to have a conversation with me, you want to tell me I'm stupid or you disagree with me or whatever, LinkedIn is the best place to be. Right. And that's all on that one site. So
that's great. We'll include that in the show notes, as well as the other link to your site, so people can find more information. And it's not like, newsletter they can sign up for. You get some more information from you proactively as well. So, So along with that, any references or recommendations for books, websites, podcasts that you'd like to share?
If you're interested in the history of AI and to sort of understand, like, why are we making decisions now? What are some of the new decisions that we're going to be making? There's a whole sort of like space of a couple of the creators of AI who are saying sort of the LLM architecture is probably not good enough. Jan LeCun has got something called JEPA. Fei Li has created these worldview models. But point of that is, I'm not going to tell you all that, except that I will tell you my book called Rebels of Reason basically traverses the 100-year history of AI in a storytelling way that's consumable, but then also can give you some insight of how evolution happens in technology, particularly this one, and things will change. In 5 years, everything we're talking about right now will be different. And so and then again, if you're thinking about the social side of social and technical discussion, my other book, Demonstrating Profound Knowledge, is, I think, pretty extensive. We're trying to, and here's the thing about both of those books. My publisher, I self-published The Rebels of Reason, but they taught me well. Gene Kim's IT Revolution was my publisher for my Deming book, and they were notoriously hard about citations. So both of my books have incredible references. So that's a good starting point to go, like Attribute's Law. Like, I have a whole reference portion about that. Like things like that. You could then go off and sort of discover any of the things that sort of. So I would say those two things are sort of my.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's good references for people to dig into if they want to go deeper. So that's fantastic. Well, John, it's been great to have you on the show. Really insightful conversation here, and love to get to know more about you. But we're going to At the end of the show here, I'd like to get to know even more about you through some rapid fire questions. So, first one is, what is your big passion outside of work?
Yeah, I've kind of lucked out here. My passion is learning, and I know it sounds cliche, but I just love learning, and so I write books, I do research. Actually, I'm sort of spreading out to. I like writing books about what I call nonfiction storytelling, but usually about technology history, and so I've written a couple of books about. They're like 400 pages long, and nobody reads 400 pages long anymore. So I've decided to start creating a new brand of maybe 30-page books. And what I'm finding is, and I can like spread out to even non-technology stories, just leadership stories. And so that's been a lot of fun. And I think the interesting thing is a lot of people tell me, when are you going to retire, John? And I'm like, I guess I'll retire when there's nothing more to learn and I'm not having fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go on for a while, right? So I think it's kind of like
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see how
I
to
got
go.
that myself. I can't imagine retiring. I'm having too much fun doing all this stuff. So
Like I don't, or, like what would retirement be other than, learning and having fun?
well, it's fun too. Like to your point, learning. It's a good representation of your learning, and you actually know you're taking it, and really it's making sense to you if you actually come back and write about it. So
Yeah. So
it's a
Liz,
good test.
no, that's, I mean, I know, the problem you'll have with me is you always run out of time, but I think that, the sort of like learning it, then there's sort of writing about it. But if you really want to cement something in, you teach it.
Mhm.
And I found over the years, if you can do all three of those on one subject, you become pretty well
Yeah,
versed in that subject. So,
yeah. Fine. Probably means you know what you're talking about then.
uh,
That's great. All right. Well, our next rapid fire question. So, if you could have a coffee chat with anyone alive or dead, sort of, have that conversation, get to know them a bit, who would that be for you?
yeah, this one's an easy one for anybody who knows me, but Dr. Deming, Edward Deming, I wrote a book about him. He's a consummate learner. Like 70 years. I mean, he in his 50s, he went over to Japan and revolutionized Japan. In his last decade of his life, he does the most significant work. And then from 1980 to 1990, right? He literally revolutionized the quality industry. But the thing that I love about him is the more I learn about it, and I've been on it, you never stop learning. And by the way, don't look into Deming if you don't want to go around a rabbit hole because he's a fascinating guy. But he was just fascinated by everything. And to the extent that the Library of Congress has literally, if you stacked all the boxes of not just his papers, but letters that he wrote, he'd see something in a newspaper and he'd write a letter to them. And it would have just be boundary spanner. And they've got it 80 feet tall would be the boxes
Hmm.
that the Library of Congress has him. So yeah, and my last book, which is Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge, is that what was interesting about it is I became an expert over a 10 to 15-year period. But what I wanted to do in the book is he died in 93, and all the cool stuff that happened post 93, lean, agile, DevOps, cloud, all these things, and particularly InfoSec, I literally proposed based on my understanding of him how he would have addressed all those things. So that was a lot of fun to be able, and it's the Deming experts. It has held its own. Like I haven't gotten hammered for like, no, you're wrong, or so. Yeah.
Yeah, he'd be a great one. Tons to learn from that guy,
Oh yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. That's awesome. All right. Well, last rapid fire question for you is sort of that legacy question. So, what do you want written on your tombstone? Is usually how we phrase it. So, kind of curious, what's that for you?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'm 67. I don't want anything written on my Zeus now. No, it was a great. I told you, I love this idea, especially the rapid fire. This is gonna sound simple. He worked hard and had fun, but I got to tell a quick story. I early on when my younger boys, they're out of the house and they're on their careers now, but I would literally say to them when they go to school, work hard, have fun, and they completely understood it. And one day I'm dropping one of my sons off at the middle school, and one of the volunteer dads, I opened the door and I'm like, hey, wait a minute, William, work hard, have fun. And the guy was like, that's stupid. How can you work hard and have fun? I'm like, yeah, well, that's the one I'm going to put on my tombstone, so.
Yeah. Well, it's a good mantra to have. I like that.
Yeah,
That's good. Very simple, but very important, very telling. So,
yeah, I should tell you who I am and why, what I did, right? So at the end of the
yeah.
day.
Well, that's great. Thanks, John. That's like I said, helps get to know you a little bit better with those couple quick questions as well. So with that, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, I like you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning in to Unlocking Momentum. If today's conversation sparked ideas or gave you a new way to think about leadership, check out our past episodes and resources. Don't forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you'd like to connect with me, Aaron Kopel, the Momentum Locksmith, you'll find the link in the show notes.